Seven.
7,000,000.
Seven.
7 new.
Seven.
7 Point Highlander.
The only other like little thing. What time are we outlined by out of my first?
We're pushing for our longest episode ever, 1 hour 22 minutes.
Oh my god! Why didn't you stop me?
Hello and welcome to 7 Point Cast. Today I'm joined not by my co-host Mouse, but my guest Mouse. Thanks for being here.
I know it's a first time for everything, but we, always had one of these episodes up our sleeves where we just talk with each other because Lion, you and I, we're friends. We are the gathering in Magic the Gathering.
Oh, look, making me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Well, Mouse, I think everyone knows who you are, but perhaps not how you got into Magic and what your ideas about Magic are as a whole. Why don't you take us a little bit of a walk through it before we get into our topic for today?
Yeah, fair enough. Look, I have. I actually still kind of remember somewhat in depth my Magic history. Playing it. It all started back in primary school when a guy. I think his name is. I knew him as Baron. I think it was his last name. Sold me for $20 a Magic the Gathering deck, which was a bit of a mishmash of soldiers with equipment. It was like in the crossover days between Mirrodin and Scourge. But it had some truly awful cards in there. Like, I remember one of the cards which immediately struck me as the best, which early days of misevaluating cards, was a 7-mana 3/3 indestructible flying artifact creature called Darksteel Gargoyle. This is when Indestructible was like, this card's just amazing. But after never really casting it, I quickly found out that the real way to win the day was just to play the turn 1, I think, Aurok Glaive Master, and then turn 2, Bone Splitter equip, whack for 4 first strike. So that was like my first early days of, playing at the at recess and lunch. The cards just got really beat up. I've still got the whole deck where it landed on anyway. We used to play these massive 2-headed giant games where they would usually be finished with a Loxodon Punisher with like 20 different keywords, hundreds of stats, whacking through an army of 400, just an entire deck worth of beast. It was a great time. Some of the best games Magic I've ever played. Had to stop playing for a while when I got to high school because, you're in year 7 and the older kids can, bully you and destroy your cards. But I picked it back up when I was one of the older kids. And by then it was Zendikar. And so that was kind of when I started playing and collecting properly. Retrospectively, a very good time to start playing because it meant that, a bunch of fetch lands were just cards I opened. But when I originally started playing in Zendikar, I was playing Mono Black Vampires with my Singleton Vampire Nocturnus, which helpfully always showed up on turn 4 exactly when I needed him to. And then eventually switched over to Control just because Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic were the thing to be doing. Then from then on in, I've basically just been playing mostly Control decks in every format I can. I do play lots of other archetypes and stuff, but those would be like the big epochs of my Magic playing until, of course, I found 7 Point, and then that's basically been all I've been playing since then.
It's quite the journey from being ripped off by one of your friends in high school for a $20 stack of cards to being a member of the 7 Point Highlander committee, isn't it?
I mean, look, you call it a rip-off, but maybe what he gave me was the greatest gift of all, the introduction to Magic.
That's right. The true product is the hobbies we picked up along the way.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to be talking about Blue Moon, and as will become apparent throughout this episode, it's rather an ephemeral deck to pin down. You can build it in so many different directions that we probably don't need to talk about Blue Moon in general, but rather let's talk about the namesake cards before we get into the philosophy of the deck.
Yeah, so as Liam pointed out, there are lots of different Blue Moon variants. I would consider myself to be way more of like a Control gamer when it comes to the Blue Moon stuff, but we are going to put a bunch of time into acknowledging some of the other ways it can be built. The biggest question you always need to ask yourself about Blue Moon, and Michael, also committee member, put this to me directly, and I think it was just a really good way of summarizing it. What are the moons doing for you? Like, how do they complement the game plan? Because they are very different in lots of other, depending on the deck you play. In a pressure-orientated deck, the Blue Moon, the moons are a way of, either freezing a board state which is already in your favor or causing your opponent to stumble only for 1 or 2 turns, but that's all you need because in those turns they die. In a more combo-y deck, the moons are almost kind of like a Teferi Time Raveler. They just choke your opponent off the ability to, deploy key pieces of interaction or to both pressure you and react in the same turn. So, they've got to choose in the turn they invest their now constrained mana into developing a threat is when you go for the jugular. Or in a more controlly list, they are kind of just like prison cards that they just stop your opponent from doing nearly anything. And whereas you get to continue to develop. So even though they are the same card, they serve radically different roles depending on what kind of deck you end up with.
I remember when I was first getting into Point Highlander, I went through all of those old Adelaide Eternal videos where Sarv would do his deck techs. And one of the most seminal ones was on Blue Moon, and I think he described Blood Moon and Back to Basics as a 7-for-1 because the opponent can't use any of their cards in their hand because their lands are now dead. Is that still true in today's 7-Point Highlander?
I mean, yeah, look, I think so. Regardless of what, regardless of how, like I described earlier, regardless of which one you end on, they still essentially form that broad archetypal function because whether you're stopping threats or stopping answers or constraining the ability to develop the board, like it does still kind of function that like this one card is stopping a lot of stuff from happening. So yeah, you could definitely think of it like a 7-for-1.
And so this is a powerful effect. We've got some alternate ones here. Are they worth considering in today's meta as well?
Yeah, look, I think so. Personally, because I'm a control player, I don't play these ones. And the reason for that is that when you don't play many other creatures, they kind of become a lightning rod for removal. Magus of the Moon in particular is pretty weak because it turns the Mountain is the color of Galvanic Discharge and Lightning Bolt and all of those other, and like Unholy Heat and stuff, and so it turns your opponent's mana base into the thing which kills it. Harbinger, I think, is a bit better because islands, are very hard to kill creatures with, generally speaking. So, there are Brazen Borrower things, but there's just less of that than the Magus. Winter Moon, look, there is like a dream where your opponent does like a massive tap out of 4 non-basic lands and then you Winter Moon them. And then, you've only got 1 or 2, whereas they've got a lot. And it's cheap. But the problem is, like, its main benefit, it being cheaper than all of the other ones, is kind of offset by the fact that it's not really very useful at 2 mana. Like, the stage of the game where this card can make a big impact is also the stage of the game where it being cheap isn't really that big of a deal. I will say the only application I've kind of thought of for Winter Moon, which might be a bit of fun, is if you pair it with Tabernacle. If you're constantly taxing your opponent's lands to keep their creatures alive, like the turn of like Winter Moon Tabernacle can make that early game actually really good. But then you're talking about 2 Singleton cards in your deck coming together to form a kind of spurious pairing. So it's probably not something people are going to play with. But if you do own both cards, I'd encourage you to give it a go. I've played it and it's all right.
And despite the different archetypes that you can slot Blue Moon style cards into, either in the sideboard or in the main board, it's a highly telegraphed strategy. Like when you play Basic Island, everyone knows Back to Basics is going to be in your deck. How does that factor into your game plan in Mulligan and in play?
Look, it kind of is and it isn't. I find, to be honest, when you start playing, like nearly the first land you always get is either Thundering Falls or Volcanic Island. And a lot of those a lot of the lands decisions your opponent's made are made very early in the game. Like their first fetch land, whether it gets a basic or a non-basic, they could be on the play. They could be they could be making that decision turn 1. You could play turn 1 Volcanic Island, and then they've made 2 lands decisions. If they've already given up 2 of their tools to get a basic land, and they've got non-basics, and all you've played is Volcanic Island, you could be on Grixis, you could be on Jeskai, you could be on anything. You could be on Prowess without moons. So I don't think that the strategy is like as telegraphed as people may think. But having said that, sometimes I feel like when it's most telegraphed is when you've got back to basics in hand yourself, and so you start fetching basics early. I sometimes do, particularly if it's game one, just like fetch up one non-basic, just to like put them off kilter a little bit, or to not completely give away the strategy, particularly if I'm on the play. So yeah, I don't think it's the most telegraphed strategy in the world. You'd be surprised how invisible it is. But it's sometimes as well, just like word gets around the room, oh, Mouse is on Blue Moon today, and then they know. But generally speaking, I usually just don't play like that's a thing, because your opponent's deck needs to. I'm rambling a little bit here, but it's not just that your opponent needs to be playing with Blue Moon in mind. They also need to have a deck that is ready to play against Blue Moon. Like, there are some mana bases which just don't have basics in them or only have one. It's going to hurt them no matter what. There's just, yeah, I wouldn't, and you might not draw them in. I just usually play to the cards I have in my hand, and I don't think too much about what I'm telegraphing, yeah, in a major way.
So perhaps the adage that people often bandy around, Blue Moon's not very good because everyone plays against it, everyone fetches their basics, doesn't have as much truth to it as perhaps some people might think.
I don't think, look, I have not found that to be the case. Like, not all decks, it's the people who fetch their basics, they are already aware, and you can see in the deck list afterwards. Like, for example, I've seen a lot of walks builds that run one of every basic. And where it's like, for example, they forgo the ability to give Territorial Kavu the 5th power because they're running one of every basic. Like, that deck is prepared. And the player who builds their deck like that already has it in mind. But there are other decks like the Grixis decks which run the Bayou and the Trop to give Deathrite the ability to exile the green. They don't care. Their plan, they're not prepared for Blue Moon, but they don't want to be prepared for Blue Moon. Like, they've decided, I'm already going to be ahead on board. I'm going to have a force. So I'm going to be able to Inquisition out of their hand. How a deck whether a deck even considers Blue Moon or how it chooses to play around it, you never really know that because you don't get to see their deck list in advance. So I think you've just got to play. You've just got to play the game you've got with the cards you've got in hand, rather than trying to like get too in the mind game about it.
Sensible. In which case, then, speaking about how Blue Moon is a very contextual deck, let's have a look at your philosophy on how to build different types of Blue Moon.
Yeah, so I will say that, for those who can't see the screen in front of me, I have a threat composition spectrum where on the far right-hand side is the threats which take the fewest turns to execute a game plan, and that's basically prowess, right? So that's your Sprite Dragons, your Swift Spear, your Slickshot Show-Off, your Cory Steelcutter. Like, these decks, this deck doesn't require many turns to make its game plan working. Like, as soon as you land a 1-drop threat, your game plan is in play. And not all prowess decks run moons, nor should they necessarily, but some do. And the ones who decide to run it is maybe they've found themselves in the meta constantly losing to mid range, for example, and they're like, I'm winning in turns 1, 2, and 3. I just need the game to stop there. And so they want to play this 3-drop card, which, like a Blood Moon, which kind of does freeze the game plan in place. Now, the reason which these decks are kind of good is that blue-red, because you don't have white and black, you don't have as much hard removal, things like Swords to Plowshares, and so eventually there are going to be threats which are just very sticky, like a Murktide Regent, for example, like a Baraglyph. And so the way which like a Prowess or like a Tempo deck will get around that is just to say they are going to be dead before this card is super relevant in the game. And so that's why I put them on the kind of like fewer turns to execute a game plan. The difference I'd say between Tempo and Prowess is Tempo is like way less all in. Like if the Tempo deck, I would think to myself, it's not running cards like Sprite Dragon, which are a top deck later dead. It's going to run more cards like Ethereal Forager maybe, or Murktide Regent, like a big delve threat. Or it might be running cards like Tashana's Tidebinder, or like Snapcaster Mage, these cards which can both be like pressure and advantage early, but also be very serviceable as, counter some crucial trigger and apply pressure late. Both lists would probably run Dragon's Rage Channeler because, the card's just really, really good. It's about as good as a 1-drop can get without being pointed. And so like a Tempo deck might be a bit more interested in, like bouncing a key threat or countering like its trigger or something like that. Where I'd say there's like a big step change is in the attrition and combo where these kind of decks require like a lot more turns to execute their game plan. So like combo, I think like the two I've put there, but there are in theory others, would be like a sneak and show package. So that would be like sneak attack through the breach, show and tell, paired with like a big dude. So probably Emrakul, Archon, Traxa. There are some other choices you can make around the edges, but you get the gist of what I'm going for with those 6 cards. The way which a combo deck is going to deal with like the big unkillable threat is by just putting something bigger down. So this kind of deck is not going to be as invested in like a really big burn spell or some sort of bouncy removal spell, because it's like, well, the Archon trigger will kill their one big dude. I'll use my burn to mop up the little dudes, and when they play their big threat, my Archon will kill it. Or my Emrakul, the Annihilator 6 trigger, will get rid of it and just kill them. Or a Traxa, like the 7 life, will just mean that I don't care so much. So, or if you're playing like a Splinter Twin thing, it's like, it doesn't matter that you have a big threat, you're just dead because I have infinite. And the Splinter Twin package would, just be your standard kind of like Kiki Jiki Splinter Twin, Deceiver, Exarch, Pestamite. There are some other choices you can make around the edges, but I'm usually thinking of those 4 cards. So combo, like once you've got the A plus B, the game is usually over, or you've accrued a lot of advantage, so much so that it might as well be over. But then the slowest one would be the attrition, where you could be settling in for like a 30 turn or more game, plausibly, because you really are going to see more than half of your deck. And the attrition decks, which I like to play personally, this is where I'm, usually the most invested, it kind of lean on Arena of Glory, just because I've found that if you play the truly like 0 win cons attrition decks, there is just always the decks are so high quality threat dense nowadays, like the opposing decks, that sometimes they can just get off the top something you just don't have an answer for, and it's very frustrating when you've got like only really 5 good quality burn cards and they draw their one threat. Like it could just be like a Murktide region. It's like, oh god, I really only have 2 answers to this, and maybe I had to use one of them earlier to deal with some particularly intense on the board pressure. I don't have time to find spend 4 more turns digging for it because I'm just going to die. So I prefer my like attrition decks to have a way to close out the game relatively quickly. And Overlord and Pyrogoyf with Arena of Glory are very good at doing that. Enduring Curiosity I've got on the screen as well is like just another example of, it just turns all of my creatures into card advantage. So maybe like I do just want to dig and like have mass card draw. And so yeah, I like that kind of deck personally. So it's like a very grindy plan, but it has a way to very quickly turn the corner and kill your opponent in like 2 to 3 turns. But obviously that requires just a few more turns than a combo deck does, which will kill your opponent in 1. But together they have that same, they have that same broad thesis of delay the game, put together the overwhelming advantage, and then they die in some amount of turns.
And so just for clarity, with these 4 archetypes, attrition, combo, tempo, prowess, there'll be some overlap of the cards. But this isn't a ranking of which is better or worse. This is just, you could build it in any of these different ways, and these are the threats you might consider.
That's right. And you could always ask yourself, kind of like, I said earlier, what is the moon doing for each of these, right? Like the first 2, the tempo and the prowess, the moon is making your opponent stumble so that you kill them, or you're already ahead on board because you've, put out a very cheap threat. Whereas the attrition combo, like the combo, the moon is kind of making it difficult for your opponent to interact with your combo. The attrition, the moon is more like a prison piece.
And down the bottom of this screen, we've got this tiny little price of progress cropped off to the side. Well, what's he doing there?
Look, price of progress in some ways is like could almost be like a one card game plan for Blue Moon. I don't exactly know where to put it, to be honest. Like, because obviously you would put price of progress in your prowess deck, but I have seen some Blue Moon decks, and I think there's a lot of wisdom to it, where they almost treat it like a combo card, where like the combo is just price of progress, fetch Mystic Sanctuary, price of progress, or like price of progress, Snapcaster, price of progress, where you might have done just like enough chip damage along the way, or you might just have like an extra lightning bolt to go the extra distance, where if your opponent has 4 to 5 lands and they're non-basic, the 2 pops will kill them, like most of the time. Or you don't have to do that much more after 2 pops. So I don't exactly know where it fits in the spectrum, but it definitely is. You can consider it a 1-turn plan. The only reason it's not like a big a big deal for me personally is that I just find with Blue Moon, like you don't get to run cards like Flage. There aren't easy ways of gaining a lot of life in these colors. Cards like Ivory Tower and stuff, they're just not good enough. And so you have to be prepared that a bunch of games are going to end in a draw. But I still think it's a quality game plan, and you could, in theory, build a Blue Moon deck which is really just centered around the way I win the game is by casting 2 Price of Progresses.
And so we will be talking about more cards in depth later. Right now we're just talking about philosophy. But first we start off by talking about, we've decided we're going to put Blood Moon and Back to Basics in our deck, and then we decide how we're going to win the game. What happens next?
Well, what happens next is that I do really feel that which answers you choose is going to heavily depend on what the overall archetype you're playing is. Now, for those who are looking on the screen, we're not going to do like a deep dive on this slide, but to give the broad strokes and philosophy, I think if you're running the tempo prowess type plans, that is to say, you're trying to end the game in a relatively small number of turns compared to like a control deck, you're going to be far more interested in burn that can go to the face, like Chain Lightning, Fire Blast, Lava Dart, and you're also going to be more interested in kind of like early game only stuff like Daze. If you're interested in a combo deck, I think you're going to be far more interested in threats that also, not threats, rather, answers that also cantrip. So like Fire Ice, Remand, Electrolyze, ways to slow down the game, but then also kind of dig you closer to try and assemble your A+B. And you're also more likely to go in on cards like Mana Drain, because Mana Drain is just a very effective way of both putting a moon into play, because a lot of the moons cost 2 colorless, or by casting a card like Sneak Attack through the bridge. So combo decks, you're interested in that kind of threat package or answer package. Whereas if you're on the nutrition end, you're going to be required to have more answers which can deal with a big board and a big generic threat. Because if the game goes longer, your opponent is also going to see more of their deck. You are not always going to have a counterspell. So a card like Magmatic Sinkhole as one of the...
That's a problem you've never had.
Yeah, Magmatic Sinkhole, like being able to deal 5, that's important. Mystic Confluence, being able to deal with more than one threat at once, that's important. Hornlock Whale, just, it's good against those delve type threats. And can also then, win the game later by itself, more important. So generally speaking, I think, you've got to really decide which answers you use in the context of what your deck is trying to do.
Right, so we've decided to build a Blue Moon deck, and then we decide how we win the game, and then we build our answer suite around the threats. And then after we've decided what our answer suite is, what do we do next?
Well, you also need to think about the card draw in much the same way. So, in my mind, the tempo lists probably more prowess. Actually, I'd say nearly exclusively prowess is going to be very interested in running a lot of impulses. These decks don't tend to run as many counterspells, or the counterspells they are interested in running are often free. So, an instant speed impulse off the top is going to, make a forcible plausibly castable. So, things like your Ren's Resolve, Reckless Impulse, Questing Druid. I think there's a new one. Lime, you're more of a prowess player than mine. What's this new spoiled one from Edge of Eternity called?
Song of the Opera? Or
Song of the Opera?
Opera? Yeah, it's instant speed, Reckless Impulse, but it's got an option to give up to 2 creatures +2/+0 until end of turn.
Yeah, so cards like these, in my mind, are more likely to be part of like a prowess list. But also stuff like Gush, right, picking up lands, is usually not, in my mind, like a control thing. You really want to be using your mana every turn. But cards like Gush and Treasure Cruise, are going to be more likely to be features of like a tempo and prowess list. Whereas if you're playing more of like a combo list, you're going to be more likely, I think, to play a card like Dig Through Time. Certainly for me, I don't think Dig Through Time is actually worth the point unless you're playing a combo list, because there are so many just good 2-for-1s nowadays in the card draw area. You want the looking at 7 cards to be very relevant, and I think that's an A+B combo deck is a natural home for that advantage. If you're going for the attrition plan, you're more likely to look at things like Library of Alexandria, where you're very happy to invest those early turns just drawing cards rather than developing a board. Mystic Confluence, again, you're just more likely to get to 5 mana. Stuff like Ancestral Vision as well, it's like the game is going to go for a lot of turns. So there are certain types of card draw which I would say you really want to think about what your game plan is. There are also some card draw which kind of doesn't matter, like stuff like Expressive Iteration, Stock Up, Flame of Anor. These are all Lauren Revealed. These are incredible cards. You should nearly play them in all of them. Tameo is one of the first points I would consider in most Blue Moon lists, regardless of archetype. Maybe Prowess isn't interested in her, but pretty much all the other ones are. And there are some ones which we've named them other considerations, but I don't like these cards. I would never play Memory Deluge. I think this card is not good. And that's mostly, like, the only advantage in my mind of Memory Deluge is that it doesn't draw cards, so it like gets around stuff like Bowmasters. But it's a very expensive way to draw 2 cards. And I think what often you need in these Blue Moon lists out of your card draw is the ability to see a lot of cards and then cast one of them immediately. Like your opponent's put something on the stack, or they've presented some board state for you to get around, and you've got to be able to both cast the card, draw a card to find the answer, and then cast one of the answers. And with Memory Deluge, you can't do that off either end of it, because 4 is a huge amount of mana, and so is 7, even late in the game. 7's a lot. Arkham's Astrolabe, I just don't think it does enough outside if you're not more than 2 colors. It's a like kind of clunky 0 selection way to draw a card, and there's already so many really high quality cantrips you could be running. I like Astrolabe if you're running like a either like this is a different colors of deck thing, but if you've got some sort of Felia package, or like you're trying to be like Beanstalk and town ain't big enough, like I like it in that kind of shell, but I don't really like it in Blue Moon. And Council's Deliberation, that one I actually would run sometimes. The one I was thinking might be there would be Archmage's Charm. I don't like that card. And that's mostly because I like Arena of Glory and Library, and I don't think you can reliably get triple blue. But I can imagine a deck which is nearly always getting triple blue playing it, but it's not for me personally. I don't think Cancel or Divination at instant speed is good enough compared to what we have available to us.
Interesting, just one of the things you said there about Gush. I remember when Gush was 0 points, I believe it was in a lot of Blue Moon decks. Do you think they were making a mistake at the time when it was 0?
I mean, look, if it's 0, don't get me wrong, Gush can do a lot of incredible things. So if Gush has less points, Gush Lutri is just a really excellent card draw package. And to be honest, I still think it's a really incredible card draw package. If someone was saying, I don't know if I'd run it in a 7-point list, because if I'm running a 7-point list, I'm almost certainly running Library. And by the time you've put 5 points into Gush and Lutri and 1 into Library, you've just got Force of Will, and that's it. Like there's a lot of good quality cards you're missing out on there. But if I was running an 8-point list, so I had Gush and Lutri and Force of Will, and then I had maybe like Tameo and one other flexible one, maybe Mana Drain to pick up Lutri, maybe Snapcaster Mage if I was doing the Price of Progress plan. I could imagine that as a sensible 8-point configuration. But when it was 0, I mean, you just get to run so many other powerful cards. So I think that the Gush would have been incredible. Another cool thing about Gush is one of Blue Moon's biggest predators is Choke, at getting out from under Choke. So yeah, Gush is a good card, and people should consider it. It's just not a card I often play with, because I'm often in a very control-y thing, headspace, and I don't like the Gush Mystic Sanctuary pick up, put down. I think that's very slow and not. I just think it's very slow, and it takes away mana, and often control decks win by having more mana than their opponent. So it's not a style of deck I like to play.
Right. Okay. So we're about to go into some more in-depth card discussions, but before we do you just want to summarize what this philosophy is overall for the listeners?
Yeah, so the broad summary is just, cards are good contextually, and most people know this, but there are like 100 plausible blue red cards you could play, and all I'm trying to get across in this broad philosophy point is to say, just make sure that the answers you choose pair well with your choice of how to kill your opponent. Because if I've seen just a lot of Blue Moon lists where the threat suite looks like they're playing an aggro deck, but the draw suite looks like they're playing a control deck, and I think that's a mistake. I think a good Blue Moon list should have answers which are well informed by the game plan created by the threats.
Right, okay, well let's have a look at some individual cards. The first of which is in-depth in removal. Now we've got all of these column headers here that slightly align to the ones that we looked at before. Can you just explain what these are before we go into some cards?
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is asterisked, and it's just to say that I think there are some threats you should nearly always consider regardless of the deck you're playing. And then there are some threats which I think feel more, also some removal, which feel more at home in certain archetypes. That's not to say that you could never cross the streams. I'm sure there are exceptions because at the end of the day, 7 points a very creative format. But I've just divvied them up like this to kind of say this is these are the features of a card which lean more into this archetype. So I think yeah, and the headers are like a universal one, combo, attrition, and tempo prowess, which you could just kind of think of as like the pressure archetype.
Okay, well let's go to the first one of universal. Can you explain to everyone why Lightning Bolt is a good card?
I mean, I don't think it's a good use of time. But look, the ones which I put as universal is like Lightning Bolt, Flame Slash, Galvanic Discharge. Single red, kills a thing, very good. Flame of Anor, I think is pretty universal. Maybe not in tempo prowess, but it's very good. Like either draw 2 cards or deal something 5. And Dress Down, I can imagine people leaving this card out sometimes, but I just think Dress Down is so good at uniquely. It's just such a unique answer, and it cantrips. It just there are so many cards, whether it be initiative or just it's just impossible to list every creature with a unique ETB or onboard ability. Whether it's ward, whether it's like a creature which anthems other creatures, whether it's killing constructs off Urza's Saga, I've just found Dress Down to be sometimes the only way out of so many situations that I'd nearly always consider it in a Blue Moon deck.
And just to harken back to something you said before, where often you might have to use a piece of premium removal to kill an early threat and now you can't kill something later. Is there any consideration to putting in different colours, like perhaps splashing white for Swords to Plowshares or some other kind of more generic removal other than just the burn?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean currently, in my current control, phase, I am on the play lots of colours and play lots of excellent cards. So I'm currently off Blue Moon, but I think. I think you should choose personally, right? Like I have seen there have been some very successful 3-color Blue Moon lists, and I for the players who want to do that, I'm all for it. Go for it, but it's just personally not for me. I find there's too much tension between the plans, and so I think if you want to be on lots of colors, do that. Play all the premium removal. Don't play cards like Flame Slash. Play Fatal Push. Play Swords, etc. But if you are going to be, if you're attracted by the power of the moons, then I think a lot of these other blue-red cards are the replacements for those, and you've just got to hope that the moons win you more games than the lack of Swords of Plowshares loses.
And there are some more universal removal spells I don't think we've included in this table, one of which is Unable to Scream. And the other one is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's the 3-mana enchantment that gives you the Monarch.
Oh yeah, true. I've what's it called?
Fall from Favor?
Fall from Favor, yeah. Look, these cards are very good. I don't think I would run Fall from Favor in a combo deck. I could see it in a pressure deck, but 3 mana to kill something's a little... Having said that though, 3 mana for your opponent's big Baragoyf, and then you get the Monarch and you're already putting on pressure could be quite good. I think, to me, Unable to Scream and Fall from Favor, they lean a little bit more into the attrition plan. These are good cards. Unable to scream is a single blue enchantment. It makes something a 0/2 toy with no abilities. So it's good at, stopping, the big creature, like the Baragoi per se. Kind of talking about some of these other, some of these headers and what cards I put under them. So in combo, I put like Fire Ice, Slick Sequence, Electrolyze. But really what I'm getting at here is just cards which cantrip, I think, or removal which cantrips, or removal that's delay, not deny, is more at home in combo. Another example could be like Roadside Blowout could go here, because you don't need to kill literally every single one of your opponent's things. You just need them not to kill you until your combo has happened. And removal that both slows the game and draws towards your combo is most at home in combo. But I could imagine playing some of these cards in other, in other archetypes. I like playing Electrolyze in an Attrition deck, for example.
Yeah, I think Electrolyze does need some defense. And the reason I say that is when I've played it, Mana Clash, CanCon, and just at the weeklies in Canberra, a common phrase I've heard uttered is, how does Mouse win games? He's playing Electrolyze, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, people don't like Electrolyze at the moment. And that's fine, like they cannot like Electrolyze. I think, look, the thing which I find very frustrating sometimes playing Blue Moon is that often your opponent there's like two categories of cards which Electrolyze answers. One is when they just draw all the mana dorks. And you're not playing like Supreme Verdict. Pyroclasm may be on the board, but even then it's not that good. So like it feels very bad unless it's literally turn one to point like a lightning bolt, which could be the only thing which stops a Minskambu, or like a planeswalker, or some sort of like end of turn flash threat or something. Like sometimes that instant speed 3 damage really it has a mark in their deck, and if you're playing a long game, that mark might appear. I like just a card where it's like, look, in the absolute worst case scenario, I can nug some piece of board presence, like maybe a Corey Steelcutter token, or nug them in the face for 2 and just draw a card, so I don't feel like I'm actually going down a card to answer it. So like Electrolyze fills that role very well, and I just found that there are like nearly every deck is making some useless token. A Slimefoot and Squee token, a Corey Steelcutter, a Mana Dork, something like that. And it's good to have a card which it doesn't cost you a card to kill it. The other type of card which Electrolyze I think is good against is that there are actually a surprising amount of good X2s that are hard to answer profitably. So like Fable of the Mirror Breaker is a really good one. If your opponent goes like Fable, you going end of turn Electrolyze the Goblin Shaman is one of the only ways to remove that feels like you haven't gone massively behind. And Fable of the Mirror Breaker it's an important card to answer, because that Goblin Shaman single-handedly eliminates your Moon strategy, because it goes up mana and it fixes the colors. So that's an important creature to get rid of. Another one might be like Broadside Bombardiers. Like that card can kill you very quickly. Electrolyzing it, your mana neutral, your card up and it kills it. And look, there are other examples, but I just think there are more X2s than people think there are. And there are more X1s than people think there are, and this card is good at killing them. Oh, another one, Douthy Voidwalker. Another great card where it's like, yep, you got to kill that thing because 3 damage a turn which you can't block will kill you, and it feels good to kill it and go up a card. So even though you're down on 1 mana in that case.
Well, Electrolyze Doubters, the gauntlet has been thrown down. You better start putting this card in your deck. I'm looking at the attrition column now, and I'm seeing Unholy Heat at the top of it. That strikes me as a universal card.
Yeah, the only reason I put it here, it could be universal. I have found that it is actually surprisingly difficult to trigger the Delirium. It's not like a 0 effort thing. Most people think, instant sorcery creature land. You don't run that many creatures in Blue Moon. And so I've found the best way to get Unholy Heat to work is to run both Dress Down and 2 Baubles. So you normally have either enchantment or you have artifact, and that'll do. Like instant sorcery artifact land is way more achievable. The other thing about it is I usually don't run it alongside Magmatic Sinkhole. To me, these are 2 cards trying to do the same thing. You choose. Personally, I do think Unholy Heat is better because of the ability to just kill something on turn 1. The other thing about Unholy Heat is that there's a particular... It's in tension with another card. It's Council's Deliberation, which is a sometimes draw spell I run, which the reason it's intention is that Council's Deliberation, which we'll talk to later, needs you to run more cards which scry. And if you're running, or like another example could be, there's this new card in Final Fantasy. It's like 2 and a blue for a 1/4, which whenever you scry or surveil, draw a card. If I'm running cards which like the scry synergy package, that means I need to be running usually like opt, and I need to be running what's the other scry one? Serum Vision. Yeah. So I want to run extra scry cards to enable it, and I found that it is too much air to be running like Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, Gitaxian Probe, like all of the good ones, and to be running Baubles and Dress Down, and to be running Opt and Serum Visions. Like, it's too much, right? It's too much air. So I think that people should just choose between running Baubles and the reward you get from that, aside from, potentially enabling like Corey Steelcutter, stuff like that. The reward you get is Unholy Heap. Or if you're running all of the extra scry cards, run those instead of the Baubles. And the reward you get is Council Deliberation, and I think it's Matova or whatever that 1/4 is called. But yeah, I just put it there for that reason. But it could go in any deck.
Doesn't Sinkhole also have that similar anti-synergy if you're putting cards on the bottom of your library instead of the graveyard?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Bauble, Sinkhole, you would need to be running Baubles. I wouldn't run Sinkhole in the Scry package.
And I'm also scrolling down this attrition list. Cards like Overlord of the Boiler Builders and Pyroglyph, they were cards that were part of the threat composition, but they're also listed under removal. Could you go into that?
Yeah, I generally speaking, I just think running any dedicated kill your opponent card is probably a mistake. Like there are some which are exceptionally powerful, like the Price of Progress lists. I do have respect for them, but for cards, I'm trying to think of a good example here. I'm trying to think of an example of a card where it's like there as literally a kill con. I don't like cards. Pardon?
Probably like Fire Fairy might be in that category.
Yeah, like Five Fairy. Yeah, not a card I run on a Blue Moon list, but yes, in theory, yeah. Like a card like that, I'm not a huge fan of. I think that all of your kill cons should also have to answer something. Pyroglyph is phenomenal because it usually kills their best thing, and it is then the biggest thing on board. Its only real nemesis is Baraglyph. Overlord of the Boiler Builders, I have found that there are enough X4 type cards that if they go Omnath and you go Overlord, and from then on in, you just try to keep the game as freezy as possible. It will win eventually. But it's also very good with Arena of just like, sometimes your late game is when I get to 6 mana, I haste an Overlord out, kill 2 things, whack you for 5, and from now on in, every single creature you play is going to be dead. Like your threats need to have like an attack mode and a defense mode component to them. So like another 2 cards I've got here which are similar is like Brazen Borrower and Hornlock Whale. Their defense mode is that they kill something for 2 mana and then later on they attack. So generally speaking, I think the best threats are ones which are also removal. And so that's why I have them in that pile.
And also Lose Focus is here. That also strikes me as a card that might be more universal, for at least for the control variants.
Yeah, well, I mean, in that case, it's not really universal, right? Like it is more in the control variants. I just wouldn't run Lose Focus in like a tempo, maybe in tempo, but I don't.
I think your audio's just gone a little bit now.
Oh, has it? Am I
yeah, you're back now. I didn't hear the back half of that sentence.
Yep, fair enough. So Lose Focus, I wouldn't run it in a prowess deck. You don't want to pass the turn with 2 mana open and see what's happening. Although it's occurred to me that Lose Focus is not removal; it is a counterspell.
Yeah, that's true.
maybe we can defer the Lose Focus discussion into a counterspell. It's there by accident. Dismember is the other card on that list. It's a very good card. It does cost you life. I find it usually saves you more life than it costs you. And maybe that could be a little bit more universal as well. But maybe I wouldn't put it in combo because you've got all of these other like cantrip removal spells you're competing with. But Dismember's a good card. Like it could probably go either in attrition or in a pressure list.
And speaking of pressure, lay it down, Mouse. Tell us about the tempo prowess cards.
I mean, look, I don't profess to be a prowess master, but there are definitely some removal spells which when I'm talking to other Blue Moon players and they go, "What about this?" And I say, if you want to play that card, just play prowess. Like Chain Lightning, Fire Blast. These cards, they deal damage to the face. they are for a deck which wants to do a lot of damage to the face. Bounce spells like Fading Hope, Vapor Snag, Roadside Blowout. If you're playing like a long game control list, I'm like, okay, and then what happens if they just play the card again? Like you're not always going to have the counter spell to kill it the second time. But in a prowess list where those cards also mean you get another attack in, I see it. They're amazing in that list. And Lava Dart, it's there to trigger 2 prowess things. Like these cards have kind of unique. They have a unique place for the decks which are interested in combat and interested in. I'm down on cards and my opponent's about to deploy a big thing, but it doesn't matter because here's a bunch of burn and they're dead. But I would not play them in any deck interested in playing a long game.
And for Roadside Blood in particular, I play that in my prowess deck, and no one seems to know what it does when I cast it. You want to just tell everyone what that card is?
Yeah, Roadside Blood, it's 2 and a blue for a sorcery speed, bounce an opponent's creature, draw a card. But it costs 2 less if it targets something with CMC 1. So it's kind of a unique card in that its dream scenario is when you're on the draw and they play a Mana Dork or a Deathrite Shaman or any turn 1 threat. Roadside Blowout is like it does feel like a blowout. You are not down cards. Their turn 1 has basically been deleted, and it makes their next plays very awkward. I've found between if they have 2 1-drops, good for them, but usually they're having to then decide between their 2-drop and playing their 1-drop again, or their 3-drop and playing their 1-drop again. Like sometimes that 1-drop doesn't come back for quite a few turns, and the reason it's good in your Tempo Prowess lists is that it becomes then a universal go away for a turn against any threat. So against Baragoi, for example, it's very good to be like, you played 3 mana, well, I've 3 mana cantrip, get you again, and hopefully the cantrip finds me towards the burn. That ends the game. So it's best at in these decks where you get to use both sides of it. I could imagine it being played in the combo deck as well, where you just want to delay the game, draw a card, delay the game, see more of your deck. So I like it. I think it's quite good in those archetypes.
And speaking of cards with both sides, down the bottom we've got in red, Sink into Stupor. Number 1, why is this in red? And number 2,
I don't personally. I don't like this card. Again, people can disagree with me, but there are like 2 cards which I see coming up a lot, which I'm not huge fans of, and that's Sink into Stupor and Otawara. The reason I group them together is they're both kind of supposed to be quote-unquote spell lands. You only get a very limited amount of spell lands in Blue Moon because you're playing Blue Moon, right? You can't afford to be going non-basic, back to basics. You're not going to win. And for me, I always play Library because I own one and I just think Library is amazing. I think it's the one which will win the games by itself the most. So that's 1 slot taken up. I nearly always play Arena of Glory because I find it's one of the best, most reliable ways to take the initiative back or to take the monarchy back, and that's really good too. And so I really like having that available to me, and I like having the Surveil land because it's just the thing which happens the most, because really it's every fetch land can be that. So that's just the most consistent advantage. And then usually you need at least 1 dual land. Volcanic Island is, but Steam Vents of your 8 points. And after that, I'd be super hesitant about playing any more non-basics. 4 is in my mind a good number. I don't mind the Otawara gamers because I find that this is a good way. I mean, Sink into Stupor does this as well. It's a good way to have a blue source which isn't chokeable. So I like that. But in particular, Otawara, I like that the activated ability is pseudo uncounterable, like it's not a spell. And so there are some, there are going to be instances where that is like a really unique effect. Whereas Sink into Stupor, like it's a counterable thing, which is like a bad version of an answer. I'm not really there for it. I think in a deck where you're already running back to basics, maybe Ancestral Visions and there's one other, Ogolorian Revealed, you already usually have a blue card which you're okay to be like your pitch to force or to subtlety or to force negation or whatever. So I think, I don't like it as a land and I don't like it as a spell. It's not really doing either of them very well, so therefore it's not really for me. But the Otawara people, I see it. I don't do it, but I see the utility.
And if you weren't playing Blue Moon, earlier you mentioned you're currently in your multicolor control phase. That's where the mana base doesn't matter as much because you're not playing moons in your own deck. Would you play Sink into Stupor?
No, because if I'm doing the multicolor thing, then I don't like. Then every monocolored land, I really want it to be basic to stop me from getting mooned myself.
Fair enough. Alrighty then. And are there any other pieces of removal you'd like to talk about before we move on to counter magic?
Look, I think the fall from favor, which you brought up earlier, people should not enough people play this card. It's very good. I just think of it as if you're playing a bunch of like cheap
Do you want to
removal.
give the text of fall from favor?
But so fall from favor is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. When it ETBs, you become the monarch and it taps enchanted creature, and their creature doesn't untap as long as you're the monarch. So, it is conditional. Like they can untap the creature if they get the monarch back. And so it means that in your fall from favor list, you should probably be thinking about cards like Subtlety, Brazen Borrower. I like it with Arena of Glory, because they can get the monarch back, and then if you snag it back straight away, then well, woohoo, they still don't untap their creature. But Blue Moon, Blue Moon really likes playing games where it wins out of just land go, land go, land go, and the monarchy is a really good way to do that, and there's not that many ways to get it in blue and red. And it being a removal spell, which helps protect the monarchy, means I think this is an exceptional card. You can imagine play patterns like they play a 1-drop, you lightning bolt it. They play a 2-drop, you flame slash, or maybe their 2-drop trades for like a piece of counter magic. They play Barragoyf, fall from favor, then it's over, right? They need a haste creature, or the game is going to end very quickly in your favor. And so, and even if they do have a haste creature, maybe you've got Force of Will, maybe you've got Subtlety. It's a very good card at creating a very tight spot for your opponent. So I really like it.
So it's a bit like a blue Palace Jailer, but removal instead of it's still doing the removal thing, but it taps their creature instead of leaving you with the 2/2.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Not ephemeratable, so it's a bit worse in that way, but yes, it is kind of like a blue Palace Jailer.
And there was another card that we were really high on for a little bit, but unfortunately has fallen off, is the Roller Crusher Ride. Is there any chance that card might come back?
No, I really had it in my mind that Roller Crusher Ride, it basically has Delirium, it doubles all your burn. I was thinking to myself, how can I kill all these big creatures? I'm like, if the burn is doubled, well, therefore, the lightning bolts now are on holy heats, and the holy heats are now basically, kill anything, but it's just too bad. It's just not good, unfortunately. It's too expensive to get off the ground, so even, unless you've got precisely mana drain, it doesn't work. So I'm doing the Woody throw my Roller Crusher right away.
And just one more class of card before we move on is I think it's Roast and Scorching Shot. Are they worth consideration?
Yeah, I experimented with Roast for a little bit. I think the only card like this I would consider playing, it's actually relatively new. I think it's called Fresh Start, which is it's 1 and a blue. It gives the creature -5 nego, and it makes it lose all ability, and it's got flash. That is the best pseudo Doomblade, by which I mean 2 mana deal with anything card I would play. The reason I think it often ends up finding the chopping block is that you have so many options which cost a single mana, which is really important, because often the way these removal spells will work is you need to survive the early game, and your turn 2 a lot of the time is going to be ponder for a removal spell, cast the removal spell. And if you are paying a premium for something, like you're paying more than one, it's usually because it's either card advantage or it does something else. Like Flame of Venor, it's removal when you need it, but it's also draw 2 cards. Or if it's like Hornlock Whale, for example, it's removal when you need it, and then it also kills your opponent late. And so Fresh Start, it is just a 1-for-1 at the end of the day. There's a liability. You could get removed, you could get blown out.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Sink of Stupor is removal when you need it, and a land when you need it.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Let's move on to counter magic.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a similar setup with the universal combo attrition and tempo prowess. Why don't you take us quick through the universal ones, and then we'll move into the more meaty ones.
Yeah, okay, so the universal ones, I just like the ones which are free: Force of Will, Force Negation, Mental Misstep. Subtlety is also free, but I find you do need to want to cast the 4-drop version of it, so maybe tempo, definitely not prowess, more attrition. So that my universal ones are the free ones. Other ones I really like are the one mana ones: Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, Stern Scalding. Again, for the same reason I described, your turn two could often be cantrip and then interact, and it's really good at doing that. And turn two is a very important turn. They are some of the only cards which allow you to successfully come back from being on the draw. So you can plausibly spell pierce, snare, or stern scalding something on the draw if they've done something on turn one or haven't. So that's good. And counterspell, it just is kind of like the best. Like in the at the 2 mana slot, other than mana drain. It's very universal. It never falls off. It's very reliable. So I can imagine every deck being interested in considering counterspell. But I can imagine the tempo paralysis list not playing it. Yeah, so they're my kind of like universal picks, which I would nearly always have in my considering pile.
Earlier, I mentioned that I overheard people saying, how does he win games? He plays Electrolyze. What I didn't mention is they followed up with the next sentence of, what's next? He's going to put Remand in his deck? And
Yeah.
I see at the top of the list Remand here. I think this card might also need some defense.
Look, I don't usually play Remand, but if I'm playing like the Sneak and Show version, I will. And it's just because, again, and this is Remand. It's the same as the Electrolyze and the Slick Sequence idea of when you don't really care about answering every threat forever, you just need to dig through your deck. I think Remand has a home. So I would consider it in those combo lists. Also in the combo list is like Daze and Mana Drain. Daze is like I don't really like Daze in control decks because again I think you win by having more mana than your opponent does, not by picking up lands to exchange them for spells. So I like Daze in combo though because often it's all about just one big turn where the thing needs to resolve. If it resolves, you win, and in that case, you just want every piece of counter magic at your disposal because you just never know, what could stop the combo. Mana Drain as well for combo because combo's the best at making use of the mana immediately in an effective way, whether it be for digging or for actually casting the combo pieces itself. Whereas in like an attrition list, Mana Drain is not that much better than Counterspell, so it's probably is not worth a point. But the pointy bit of the power is at its best in the combo decks. In the attrition lists, I like cards like Lose Focus because it's like it's kind of like a main deckable Flusterstorm. And for what it's worth, I think Lose Focus has almost permanently unseated Mana Leak. I have never found room for Mana Leak in any of my lists because I just think Lose Focus is better. It falls off less hard. It has that unique Flusterstorm ability, and you don't want like that many 2-drop counter spells, particularly when there are so many good free and 1-drop ones. I've never found room for Mana Leak. Lose Focus always comes in on top. Cryptic Command I've really come around on. I was really anti-Cryptic Command for a long time, but the synergy with Mystic Sanctuary is so good. We went through this in our episode with Itai. Whether you have the Monarch or whether you don't, the ability to like counter a spell every other turn, it just puts your opponent in a real like you've got to have answers now and quickly, or you're going to be in a real bind. And so, as a good card which counters spell, draws a card, but has this kind of like lock potential, I like it in the nutrition decks. Probably wouldn't play it anywhere else. Same thing with Mystic Confluence. You need to be at 5 mana for this card to be good, unless you're wanting to play a really, really long game. I would consider it. But if you are playing a long game, killing, quote unquote, bouncing lots of creatures, bouncing tokens and stuff, but also having that draw option is really good. And Subtlety is another good example of it's just a way which, if your opponent goes turn 1 or 2, turn 2 or 3 White Plume Adventurer, Subtlety will help you, but ideally you want to cast it for 4. You want to be able to be like, stop your dude, here's a threat, which can then present, pressure and, a way to claim back the Monarch if you're playing 4 from favor, or just a way to kill them. So it's, it's a good card in those attrition lists. In the Tempo Prowess column, I've just put Daze there again because obviously it's at its best in Tempo Prowess, but I would be playing way less counterspells in those lists, just because they're very bad with impulses in the prowess list, and because you need to make room for threats. And so you are, obviously going to be playing a little bit less removal and a little bit less counter magic, and maybe some of your threats, like Tidebinder, for example, might double as counter magic, or maybe Murktide is kind of like removal because it's a giant big blocker. So you need to trim. You need to trim on answers if you're playing a tempo-y list, and so you would play some less stuff. That's all.
And with all the counter magic and removal in mind, often like the offset adage, if you don't play into the counter spell, then they've countered that spell for free and they've got an extra turn, or you need to wait until the way you beat control is you double spell on one turn and make them not be able to deal with it. Do those adages translate across the 7 Point Highlander when you're playing Blue Moon in specific?
Sometimes, sometimes I do. So like it's all contextual. I have found not necessarily as like a Blue Moon player, but as a control player, when your opponent runs out the real like if the threat they're running out is actually going to end the game, like if I'm playing like 4 color control and they like Blood Moon me, I find that's good and worth it. If you're kind of just running out a generic threat, the double spelling thing can often be better, but it also depends what you're double spelling with. So, for example, like if the double spell is like a mana dork and a threat, that's not a really great double spell. I think those things should just be run out because either half of them could resolve and it would be totally fine. But if the double spell is like a hand disruption spell and then a threat, that's really powerful. Like that's something I would consider waiting for maybe. So yeah, it's contextual. I think two good threats. If it's and it also depends how many turns you're waiting. Like I wouldn't wait like 2 or 3 turns to do that because in 2 or 3 turns, you're giving your control player, the opponent, the option to dig and to find answers so they can answer your double spell. But if it's only 1 turn, maybe I'd consider it if you've got 2 quality threats. But like yeah, it's very hard to make a sweeping statement on because it's very it's just so contextual on how much they know about my game plan already, how much they know how many cards they know I've seen, if there's any onboard pressure, which I might be compelled to deal with, particularly if I've already missed like there are going to be things like if they've got onboard pressure and I've already not answered it for a turn, like I've let it attack me, that kind of should signal to the opponent if he had a removal spell for this, he probably would have used it. So what has he got in his hand that should increase your priors on maybe they have counterspell or some removal. So there's just so many contextual factors. It's hard to make a general sweeping statement.
And as a follow up to that, about knowing the texture of your hand, do you find yourself often then countering cards like Gitaxian Probe to protect what's in your hand, the knowledge of it?
Good question. Have I ever countered a Gitaxian Probe, particularly with Mental Misstep? Absolutely, I have. Just trying to think what the context of that was.
Well, you've definitely done it for me when I'm playing Prowess, but you've also spell pierced a Git Probe.
Yeah. I think if I have a moon in hand and it's game 1 and I've got the option to do it, I would do it. For sure. Because that's going to be, the knowledge of the moon or the back to basics could really alter like future land decisions, and so I would probably counter it then. I don't know if I would ever force of will a Gitaxian Probe. That seems like a bit much. It would have to be a very particular sequence of cards. There are also some like really high impact cards, like maybe I was going to say Tamio, but you'd probably rather keep the counterspell to counter whatever attacks it. It's probably Knowledge of the Moons, to be honest. If it's Knowledge of the Moons, or if you're playing like the Price of Progress version, Knowledge of the Price of Progress, these are the kind of cards I might invest counterspells in Gitaxian Probe to stop, but not much else.
And down the bottom of the slide, we've got 2 cards in the naughty box, Invert Polarity and Archmage's Charm. What did they do to deserve the red text?
Yeah, like I've already talked about Archmage's Charm, but Invert Polarity is much the same. I just don't like these 3 mana cancels. I just think, particularly when you're on the draw, they're like, for what it's worth, like when I'm on the draw, I'm often siding out the 2 mana counter spells because they're too slow. The 3 mana ones, it's like, if this thing is only good when your opponent's at 4 mana, and your opponent's good, they're going to attack you they're going to attack you and then do stuff in their second main phase. You're surrendering so much damage. You're surrendering so much damage, so much board position, and And when they're only doing their extra good thing like half the time in the case of invert polarity, I'm not there for it. And I've got to stress as well, in the same logic as the memory deluge, often the way which these blue moon and even most control decks work is not that you just have the answer, it's that you are digging for the answer and then casting it. And we'll talk about some draw spells, but like brain freeze, that's a good so not brain freeze, brain surge, that's a good card. It shows you 4 cards, but it costs 3. Like brain surging and then spell piercing something, that's excellent. Brain surging and then seeing an invert polarity, it's like, well, I guess this might be useful next turn, maybe. Like it's not good. So I don't like the answers if they're expensive.
Sensible. So we've been through threats and we've been through counter magic. Now the slide that everyone has been waiting for, particularly the control players, card draw.
Yeah, look, I'm a big card draw fan. Obviously, I will say just this as a general thing. If you're playing a control deck, you have to draw more cards than your opponent, or you will lose. Um, because so many of the creatures nowadays, they're very hard to one for one against. Like, they have an ETB, or they have something they do from the graveyard. Like, just playing a bunch of one for ones is a recipe for disaster. You need to draw more cards. And particularly snowbally draw spells, or draw spells that don't require a big mana investment, are extra good, because like library is amazing, because it's like in every spare turn you can draw a card. The fall from favor is really good because it has that snowballing effect of the monarch. So that's why I put like memory deluge in the naughty box, right? It costs too much. 4 mana is too much to pay for 2 extra cards. So, in terms of the card draw which you play, obviously there are the cantrip ones, which you should nearly always do, the Brainstorm, Pondo, Preordain, and Git Probe. I think the other ones you should nearly always consider are Expressive Iteration, Stock Up, Flame of Venor, and Lorien Revealed. I don't think these cards require that much explanation. They just are the cleanest 2-for-1s with the lowest drawbacks. They're the most mana efficient, whether it's because they're at instant speed like Flame of Venor, or they can turn into a land like Lorien Revealed, or they just see the most cards for the cheapest rate, and that's where Expressive and Stock Up fit in. So that's where I'd consider universally. As for my other columns, if you're in combo, I think combo is a pretty unique home for Dig Through Time. I've played Dig Through Time, I played it at the Mana Clash, but I kind of regret it, to be honest. I just think when you've got so many Dig Through Time-esque cards, like your Stock Ups, this new one, Consult the Star Charts, it's kind of like an impulse or a memory deluge, so it can be what you want when you need it. And like Brain Freeze is another good instant speed 2-for-1. When you've got so many of these cards available to you, the looking at 7 has got to be colossally relevant, or it's not worth a point, because there are lots of other good places to put points. Like Snapcaster Mage is really good and underrated. Like Fable of the Mirror Breaker is really good as well. Like there are so many really powerful places to put points. I wouldn't pay for it unless the looking at 7 was really exceptional, and that's where obviously in a combo deck it can be amazing. Particularly as well if you've got like tutors like Intuition and Mystical Tutor. I think Dig Through Time is really good because you could find the tutor and then cast the tutor immediately. So both the looking at 7 and the fact that Dig is very mana efficient pair really well together. So it just increases your probability of like getting both the A and the B in the one end of turn. So I like Dig Through Time in combo, but not many other places. For attrition, not enough people play Ancestral Vision. The card's really excellent. It's one of the best turn ones. If you're playing a loot tree package, it's really good with loot tree. You just find one of those turns to pick up the loot tree, and then if I'm playing against a control player, you use loot tree as a counter spell. So you just let the visions resolve, pass priority. If they don't counter it, great, you're up 3 cards, you're going to win. If they do counter it, you flash in the loot tree, they need to have 2 counter spells. If I'm not against a control player, I will nearly always aggressively just like double visions myself, draw 7. You're going to get a land, so you can always play a land and interact. Most of the interaction I play costs 1, so that's fine. You're probably going to get a free spell. We didn't put Fury in the removal thing. That's a terrible travesty. Fury should definitely be in the removal thing. You could get a Fury, or you could get a free spell like Force of Will. There are, you're going to find something to do. That's Ancestral Vision in a nutshell. And also, in the late game where Ancestral Vision is supposed to be really bad, I have found there are a surprising amount of late games where it's actually good. Like sometimes people don't think of it because the turns just end really quickly, but sometimes like two, like you know, 1 out of 3 turns is just I got to land, play it, go. And so yeah, instant revisions is better than people think it is late, and it's eminently pitchable to force of will or subtlety or force negation if you really don't want it. The other things I've got there are just and brain surge should probably be in this list as well. You need other so you need other ways for when you go land go with a counter spell in hand. You need ways for your opponent's lack of action for the turns that happens to be bad for them, and an instant speed draw spell is what you want there. So brain surge is good at doing that. Deduce is good because it does it twice for cheap. So from as early as turn 2, you can pass with a counterspell or a lose focus open, and then deduce when they do nothing. Use the clue to do it again when they do nothing later. And we also already talked about the Scry package, the Council Deliberation Serum Visions Opt. That's good for that as well. The big draw of Council Deliberation is that you could surveil it into the bin, or you know, maybe discard to hand size or whatever. But the bigger thing is just that it's free. When you scry, you exile it out of the graveyard, you get the second draw for free, which is really good because drawing for free is well, I guess doing most things for free in Magic is pretty broken. The Tempo Prowess list, Gush and Treasure Cruise, they're points expensive, but when your threats are very like when your threats don't cost points and they're very generic, like they're all 1 or 2 mana, get bigger when you cast spells. You can afford to put more points into draw power, so that's why I think they're most at home there. And all of the impulse effects, because you know, in a control deck you're running too many counter spells or situational removal spells, you can't afford to run them. But in like a prowess deck, you're more than happy for the impulses because they're very cheap 2-for-1s. Yeah, so that's like my kind of card draw thing in general.
And there are a million different cantrips that we could have put on here, but just my specific knowledge about your decks, you very rarely play Consider. Could you tell us a little bit why Consider doesn't make the cut for you a lot of the time?
I just think if I'm going to play that, I'd rather just play Opt and do the Council's Deliberation package, or the other one I'd play before it would be Portent, particularly if I'm playing Snapcaster Mage. Sometimes destroying the top half of their deck and then destroying it again is like buys you enough time to end it for them. But for me, it's just like seeing one card is just no big deal, unless it has some significant other upside. I'm not really playing a graveyard deck, and kind of like as I said before, you don't want too much air in the deck. Like you can lose games as a control player to just spending too much of the mana in turns 1, 2, and 3 cantripping and not removing things like that. That will kill you. So I have enough. At some point, you just have enough of these card draw spells, and I think Consider's just one. It's not like a terrible card. It's just not good enough and doesn't come with any significant extra upside to justify a spot.
Right, sensible. So we've looked at threats, we've looked at counter magic and removal, and we've looked at card draw. The last one we're going to look at is the mana base. Why don't you take us through some of the universal ones? Because I'm surprised by the first couple on the list, to be honest.
Yeah, the basic island, basic mountain. Yeah, I know. Look, they're a controversial pick. Look, the only thing I'd say about the mana base is, in general, I think you only have room for like 4 and 5 non-basics. If you're in the attrition list for sure, because like you know, for me it is always library, Survival Land, Volcanic Island, Mystic Sanctuary, and Arena. Right, 5. I said 4 is a good number for, but actually no, it's 5. Beyond that 5, I am really struggling to justify any extras. I don't play Steam Vents for that reason. I think it goes too much, but I think the 8-point list should be interested in playing it, obviously, instead of Volcanic Island. I don't play any more basic mountains than 1. I think 1 is all you need, because again, half of your moons, Blood Moons, gives you more mountains, so that's no problem. I guess Arena of Glory for me would kind of be like the second basic mountain. The only thing I would say for people to watch out for is don't play too many red-only fetches. Those cards are actually, they do die a surprising amount of the time. Like, I would always play all of the blue fetches. I would always play all of them. But the red fetches, I might neglect to put in 1 or 2. Just because they can be dead draws. And you want, particularly because I'm a control player, I'm not interested in getting to 4 mana. I'm interested in getting to 8 mana. So it is actually important that the last land is a real land. Um, yeah, so just I often neglect to play like Bloodstained Mire or Watered Foothills, or sometimes both, for example. Um, when you're in the tempo prowess lists, you are a little bit more okay with playing things like Barbarian Ring, Fire Islet, some of the early ones like Spy Bluff Canal, just because if the Blood Moon does totally destroy your mana base, or make it all red, that's often not game ending, because if you're already ahead on board or your opponent's already dead in 1 or 2 turns, fine, that's okay. All you need is red for burn anyway, so that's fine. Um, the only other consideration is if you're like terminally afraid of choke, like there's just maybe your local meta has tons and tons of chokes in it. I think it's okay to maybe swap out the Mystic Sanctuary package for like cards like what's the one? Is it not Thundering Falls?
It's River Pyre Verge, Sulphur Falls, Shivan Reef.
Yeah, Sulphur Falls. Yeah, Sulphur Falls and Riverfire Verge. Like I don't do this, but I get it because choke does suck to play against. But this is why I play cards like Brazen Borrow, right, as a way to kind of get around it. So yeah, if you're like terminally afraid of choke and you're not playing Gush, there's an option for you if you want it. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's an option.
And to kind of bring it a little bit full circle, we started with talking about Blue Moon, and just now a couple more questions about it. How often do you side out Blue Moon, acknowledging that different archetypes will side it out at different points?
Yeah, good question. Um, it's not more than 50%, but it's not that far off that. Maybe like 40% of the time. Like if I'm on the draw against an aggro deck, I will side it out. Um, because it's just too useless. If I'm against another Blue Moon player, obviously I'll side it out. If I'm like if I feel like my deck is already favored against them, not because of the Blue Moon thing, but just like if I feel like the general blue red um, answers and threats thing is already good against what they're doing, I will side it out because I'm already good against it. I'd like more of what I'm good against. Um, so yeah, that's the kind of, I guess, general guide. Like again, you've got to remember to ask yourself, what is the moon doing for you? And if it's not doing that anymore, side it out. If you're playing like the pressure deck, and the idea of the moon is I will be ahead on board, then the moon will lock them out. If you're playing against another deck which is also good at getting on the board very quickly, you should side it out. Um, in the control thing, if it's like a prison piece, like I can't fight literally every giant dude they play with my burn, because the thing's too big, the moon will stop them from casting it. But then their deck doesn't really have any of those pieces, then yeah, I'd probably side it out. Because if they're not playing any dudes which the moon's supposed to stop, what's the point? If they're playing like a very fast combo or a very artifact meta centric deck, I will side it out. Which, like, this sounds like a very long list, but truth be told, these things they don't come up more than half the time. But yes, there are definitely times to side it out.
Just as you mentioned artifact mana, what if it's like the Tolarian Academy style artifact deck? Are you siding it out then?
Good question. I don't think I've actually ever played against the Tolarian Academy artifact style deck. But if you ask me in a vacuum, if I'm playing at Tolarian Wheels, I think Back to Basics is very bad against that deck because they have so many ways to just untap it anyway. Um, might I play Blood Moon? Yeah, probably, because I don't think they can combo off if Blood Moon's on the field. But I'd probably side out the Back to Basics.
And do you ever find yourself, for lack of a better word, bluffing siding out a Blood Moon or a Back to Basics, or bluffing siding it back in? I don't mean like taking out cards and pretending you're changing a sideboard. I mean siding it back in when it might not be optimal to do so, or siding it out because you don't see every card every game.
No, look,
Just to put more color on it. I mean, you know how at the start you said people will make their fetching decisions early in the game, but once it's game two, they likely know you've probably got a moon in there, so they might be fetching for their basics, or have some kind of enchantment removal. So if you side it out, they've got more dead cards, or they've corrupted their mana base in a way that might not be best for their game plan.
yeah, okay. Look, I think sometimes I'm not saying these are necessarily correct thoughts, but these are thoughts I have had before. Sometimes I'm playing against a deck where if I play the Moon or the Back to Basics game one, and I've seen cards like Troll of Khazad-dûm, like ways to fetch out basic lands, I will side it out, suspecting that they have basic lands. If in game two I don't see many basics, like I see those cards again, but they're not getting basics with them, or maybe like they're playing Walks, and I think, oh, Walks decks often pack some basics, or they're playing Grixis, and I don't see any of the Trop or Bayou cards in game one. Like if I think they're on something, and then in game two I still don't see any basics, so I might side them back in. To be like, oh well, I thought that I was going to see this stuff. I didn't. Maybe they're not prepared. I'll go in and on the Blood Moon. The closest like thing I get to mind gaming is if it's like if my opponent is like vocalizing, like making large overtures about like if trying to evaluate whether I've sided the moon or in or out or not, and I'm like playing coy and playing dumb, I might do the thing where I like shuffle all 15 sideboard cards into the deck and then pull 15 cards out just to really like maximize the ambiguity of whether it's in or not. But I don't think I've ever thought to myself, I'm going to play a suboptimal deck to mind game my opponent. I don't think I've ever had that thought.
Right. And just one final question on the Blue Moon. Imagine you're a person who's just picking up Blue Moon for the first time, and you don't want to get you don't want to get suckered into just keeping hands because they have the critical Blood Moon or Back to Basics in them. What does a good opening hand look like that also has Blood Moon or Back to Basics in it?
I mean, just a good opening hand in any control deck. Honestly, just like two or more lands, or two or three is usually best. 2 to 3 lands, a 1-drop removal spell, preferably a 1-drop piece of counter magic, and a 2-drop piece of generic counter magic, and like a deduce or something like that. But the deduce or cantrip, take it or leave it. But yes, usually what I'm looking for is a way to answer something on board, a way to answer something on the stack, and a draw, like an engine to get ahead. And if one of those, the 7th card happens to be Blood Moon or Back to Basics, well, gravy. That's amazing.
So are you keeping hands that are like all in? I'm going to cast Blood Moon and protect it with the Force of Will.
On the draw, definitely not. On the play, I guess like a better question is, would I keep like Island, Mountain, Back to Basics, Force of Will, like late game blue card on the play? Yeah, maybe. If I know my opponent's playing aggro, I'm a bit more nervous about that. But I've probably sided out. If I know they're playing aggro, I've sided out the Back to Basics, so that's probably not going to come up. Yeah, if I was on the play, if the hand was like, I don't know, like Mystic Confluence, Force of Will, Back to Basics, and 4 lands, and I can make them basics, yeah, I think I might. Yeah, I would go that on the play game one. Sure.
Landscapers beware. Mouse will keep
Yeah.
his hand against you.
The only other like little thing. What time are we outlined by out of my first?
We're pushing for our longest episode ever, 1 hour 22 minutes.
Oh my god! Why didn't you stop me?
You don't interrupt the maestro while he's going.
Am I really longer than Steven?
I think so. Yeah.
No way. We have to compare the times afterwards. I've committed a crime if I've made an episode longer than Steven. No, Steve, no, okay, look. No shade on Steven. He has a lot of detail, and I appreciate it. But look, maybe I'm just in good company. Look, the only other thing I'd just say in closing is just quickly on like points and points to choose. I think I've already made quite a big hay about like Gush and Lutri and explaining that, and I've probably also explained why I think that like Tutors, Dig Through Time, Mana Drain probably belong exclusively in a combo type shell. What I do think are other good uses of points are, and I'm just going to pull up the points list so I don't forget any of them.
Well, kind of ludicrously, almost all of the points on the points list could go in a Blue Moon deck.
Yeah.
Like the vast majority are blue-red.
It's true. A lot of them are. I think Snapcaster Mage is really good. I think particularly when you've got a really narrow set of answers, as a 2-color deck often does, being able to recur the best one is really good. I think Tameo is good, and I would consider it in nearly all of them. I think the One Ring is really good if you're on the combo decks, because you only need to survive an extra turn. You get to like that. You're going to kill them all in one turn. But I wouldn't put it in the control decks. I'd also maybe consider it in the tempo-y lists. If you're killing them quickly, I think the One Ring is good. True Name, I don't think is good. I wouldn't play that.
Would you play it at 0?
Yeah, maybe, but it depends. I definitely tested at 0. Ragavan is good if you're in the tempo or the prowess list, but not so good in the nutrition lists. Murktide region, kind of this. Look, Murktide, you can kind of put it anywhere, to be honest. Personally, it's not my style of play, but yes, this card is good. You could play that in any of them. Library, I love it. I'd always play that in the big ones. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I actually think is really good, particularly if you're playing cards like Subtlety, Snapcaster Mage, Pyrogoyf. Like, Fable Pyrogoyf is like casting 2 Price of Progresses. It will win the game. So I really like that one. Dreadhorde Arcanist, I wouldn't play. Even in the temporary priority list, I wouldn't play it. Oculus, same thing as Murktide. I'd consider it, but I'd be mindful. I probably wouldn't play that with Unholy Heat, because unless you're also going to like back it up with like Thought Scours and stuff, and the Darcy, and then I think you should just be playing Grixis. But yeah, it's a consideration. All right, that's pretty much all of them. Those are the ones I wouldn't play.
In the 1 points or in the entire
Oh, in the whole list. There's like the point. Those are the points I would consider and where I think they belong / don't.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Like the real beauty of playing this deck, like there are lots of different archetypes, lots of different points configurations, and you really get rewarded for thinking about the cards you put in your deck. It's less,
100%.
Like there are lots of cards that can go in, but it's less cookie cutter. I must play all of these staples.
Yeah, it's a very creative deck. There's lots of different ways to do it, and and I've seen cards like Crackling Drake in top 8 Blue Moon lists. Like you can do some wild stuff in these lists and be rewarded for it. But this episode is my 2 cents on at least the look. I would encourage people to maybe focus less on the individual cards' likes and dislikes. Like there's quite a few which I dislike, which I know other people do. You can play them if you want, but what I do think is the most important thing is the consideration of what cards match with which archetype and strategy. I think that is a very important thing to think about, particularly if you're a new player, and Blue Moon is often a deck given to new players. So yeah, think about that, and I think you'll get a lot of reward out of it.
Excellent. Well, Mouse, thanks so much for being a guest on 7 Point Cast. Everyone who's listening, please consider liking and subscribing, or leave a comment under the video. We'll be posting this on Spotify and on YouTube. And if you're interested in coming on and talking about a deck or an archetype or anything 7 Point Highlander related, please send us a message on the Discord, and we'll love to have you on.
And also, in closing, which is very important, okay, Lime and I made the critical error of having season 1 be 8 episodes long, despite the fact that it is 7 Point Cast. What a terrible oversight. Let's just say it was our nod to the 8 Point gamers out there. But this time we are going to be numerically appropriating finishing season 2 on a 7th episode, which I believe is next week going to be a day late. All right, we're going to release it on Tuesday, not Monday. But in exchange for your patience, we promise to have a very special high quality guest and another 7 Point Cast first. This one being, the first being it was just me. But the second episode will have an even more doubly as exciting. See if you can decipher that clue. 7 Point Cast first. So please join us next Tuesday for the finale of season 2.